up every morning in a house that was built by slaves.
African Americans built this nation. We built this nation. You know, you're just starting to get real credit for that. Okay, I don't know if you know that. You're just starting to get, you built the nation. We all built it, but you were such a massive part of it. Bigger than you were given credit for. Does that make sense? Right?
We have an idiot as a president. We know that. We know that. And we know he doesn't regard the Constitution. He doesn't regard any of the foundational things that America was built on. However, America, what was it built on? The backs of slaves.
The building you see on every dollar bill? That's stolen labor turned into national pride. They love to brag about America's founders. But they never brag about the black hands that built the president's palace brick by brick.
They called it the People's House, but never said which people built it.
They call it the House of Freedom, but it was built by people who had none. But history preferred to erase them so America could keep pretending it was born perfect. Wild how the House of Democracy was built on a foundation of hypocrisy strong enough to last centuries.
The workforce, a mix of free laborers, immigrants, and tragically enslaved African Americans.
Payroll records show slave owners were paid for each enslaved person. They were marked with an N before their names for Negro.
The White House was built by slaves, so I guess they forgot to mention this in your patriotic school books? That the People's House was literally built by people who didn't count as people. The White House, yeah, the symbol of American freedom, needed cheap labor and surprise.
Did you know that enslaved black people helped build one of the most iconic buildings in America? The White House.
The White House wasn't built by geniuses in powdered wigs. It was built by enslaved black craftsmen who never got paid, never got credit, and never got the chance to walk through the front door of the home they created. All forced to create a symbol of freedom for a country that refused to free them. The foundation of America is black labor, not white legends.
And if we were to take off the facade of the White House, you would still see the fingerprints of the enslaved people that made those bricks. Primarily black women and black children.
Imagine being forced to build a symbol of freedom without any freedom. However, their contributions weren't acknowledged for many years.
They were fed 2 meals a day and they normally slept in the attic.
All of the earliest presidents, except for John Adams and his son John Quincy Adams, owned enslaved people. George Washington, the first president of the United States, was not left out. In fact, he was a notorious slave owner, which he used to increase his wealth through the Vernon plantation.
Names like Peter and Ben, whose stories were buried for centuries. In 1792, construction began in Washington, D.C. This isn't just about a building. It's about slavery, race, and the hidden labor that built a nation.
Many of the enslaved workers were rented out by their owners to the federal government, which paid the slave owners, not the workers themselves.
And when it was finished, they went back to bondage. The White House wasn't the only one. Enslaved people built the U.S. Capitol, the Smithsonian, and countless other government buildings.
New York will remain a city of immigrants, a city built by immigrants, powered by immigrants, and as of tonight, led by an immigrant.
So next time you see the White House, remember, it wasn't just designed, it was built by people whose names history often forgets.
Hello family, welcome to the channel. So today we are here to talk about an uncomfortable truth about the White House in the United States. Yes, that powerful symbol of freedom, that powerful symbol of democracy was actually built by people who were legally treated as property. Yes, you heard that right. There were people who were not free and they were slaves. Isn't that ironical and symbolic in some way? What do you think? You see, these people quarried the stones, cut the timber, laid the bricks, and drained the land. What does this tell us about slavery in the first place? It was organized, funded, and administered by the same state that spoke about liberty and equality. Isn't that ironical? And yet, many Americans grow up never knowing about this. You'll never hear it more often than not. It's rarely taught in schools, and it's hidden deliberately so that people don't actually get to learn about it. So that's why when you hear Black Americans, demand for reparations, it's not because they have maybe some hidden agenda or whatever. It's just they need that part of history, resolved once and for all. Because a nation built on freedom but constructed through bondage carries contradictions, brothers and sisters. So family, today we are here to talk about this very subject matter, and if time allows, we'll also talk about the fact that America was built on stolen land and the people were actually stolen. So that begs the question, is this still the White House or Black House? Maybe you can ponder that as we continue into the video. So into the video, I'm doing a long reaction on how enslaved Americans helped build the White House. That truth still matters today. We really can't hide away from it. And I'm not doing this to provoke outrage, but to confront history honestly. So if you value such grounded discussions, I implore you to subscribe and let us do this thing together. So let me play a couple of clips that we'll watch together, and then at the very end, I'll be chiming in with my commentaries.
They call it the House of Freedom, but it was built by people who had none. Look at the White House, America's symbol of power. But what if I told you its foundation was built by enslaved Africans? In 1792, George Washington authorized the use of enslaved labor to construct the home that future presidents would live in. Hundreds of men, some barely older than 16, laid every brick, carved every stone, and dug every trench. They worked long hours unpaid, while white overseers and architects like James Hoban took credit and claimed triumph. Their names aren't on plaques. No monuments record their sweat, their blood, their stolen labor. Even today, walking through those iconic halls, you won't see any evidence of the people who actually built this place. They built the nation's heart, then history tried to erase them.
No one contributed more to the building of America than the black man. By the works of their hands, labor, ingenuity, and suffering, the people of color made the Americas great. Although the American and world educational system does little in recognizing these contributions. However, in the annals of American history, few figures embody the spirit of ingenuity and resilience quite like Benjamin Banneker. Born in 1731 to a free African-American family in Maryland, Banneker emerged as a polymath whose contributions spanned astronomy, mathematics, and literature. Notwithstanding, his most enduring legacy may well be his pivotal role in the design of Washington, D.C., the very heart of the nation. As the young country sought to establish a capital that would reflect its democratic ideals, Banneker's remarkable intellect and vision would become instrumental in shaping the city's layout. Despite the racial prejudices of his time, he would not only challenge the status quo, but would also leave an indelible mark on the nation's capital. This exploration of Benjamin Banneker's life and work reveals not only the brilliance of a man often overlooked in the historical narrative, but also the profound impact of his contributions to the very foundations of American democracy.
Records show enslaved laborers were rented from their owners for $5 a month, paid to the slaveholder, not the worker.
Who really built the White House? Everyone knows the White House is where the president lives, but do you know who actually built it? Started in 1792, designed by Irish architect. Construction began in 1792, and the design was by James Hoban, an Irish-born architect who beat out 8 other competitors in a design contest. Built by enslaved and free workers. The workforce, a mix of free laborers, immigrants, and tragically enslaved African Americans. They quarried stone, sawed timber, and laid bricks. Their skilled labor literally built the nation's most famous home. Scottish stone, Virginia brick. Fun fact, while the bricks came from Virginia, the sandstone used in parts of the building came all the way from Scotland. Burned in 1814, rebuilt in 1817. During the War of 1812, the British torched the White House in 1814. It was rebuilt by 1817 once again with both free and enslaved workers. A house built by many hands. So next time you see the White House, remember, it wasn't just designed, it was built by people whose names history often forgets. Please comment below on your thoughts about the White House being built by enslaved and free workers. Follow us for more U.S. history revealed.
Y'all remember when Donald Trump said this?
African Americans built this nation. You built this nation. You're just starting to get real credit for that. Okay, I don't know if you know that, You're just starting to you built the nation. We all built it, but you were such a massive part of it. Bigger than you were given credit.
Hold up, Black Americans. Don't get ahead of yourself. Just when you thought you getting your just due and recognition, somebody else is here to take it away.
So Donald Trump, since I know you're watching, I have 4 words for you. Turn the volume up. New York will remain a city of immigrants, a city built by immigrants, powered by immigrants, and as of tonight, led by an immigrant.
Let them tell it. Donald Trump is trying to erase Black American history when he just gave credit. Now, out of Madummy's mouth, Black Americans didn't have anything to do with the infrastructure. Black Americans didn't have anything to do with the foundation. When it's historically proven that Black Americans built New York, laid the roads, the ports, was a major factor in the development of this nation as a whole. But let Madummy tell it, Black Americans had nothing to do with the development or infrastructure. Immigrants came to this country and this country was already built, developed. Black Americans even paved the right way for them to come here. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1964-65.
I wake up every morning in a house that was built by slaves.
Former First Lady Michelle Obama reminded America of the slave labor that went into building the White House during a speech at the Democratic National Convention 4 years ago.
And I watched my daughters, 2 beautiful, intelligent black young women, playing with their dogs on the White House lawn.
In its online exhibit, the White House Historical Association linked more than 300 enslaved men, women, and children to building and staffing the White House through the early 19th century. Historians found enslaved people were involved in every aspect of construction. They cleared the land, cut stone and wood, created bricks, and built the walls and the roof. White House records show where those hundreds of slaves came from, and it was from all over the DMV. This interactive map shows slave owners rented out their slaves to help build the White House from as far north as Cecil County to down south in southern Maryland and Stratford, Virginia. Payroll records show slave owners were paid for each enslaved person. They were marked with an N before their names for Negro. The exhibit also shows an extensive timeline of enslaved and free African Americans in and around the White House, and there's a list of all of their known names. Now, there are still pieces of their stories that were never documented and may be lost forever. But historians say their goal with this project is to return these people to the forefront of history.
They called it the People's House, but never said which people built it. Follow and share if no one told you. The White House was built by enslaved black labor. From the stonework to the carpentry, from the digging to the bricklaying, it was our ancestors' hands that raised that mansion from the dirt. No contracts, no paychecks, no credit. They were rented out by slaveholders, given scraps to eat, worked through heat, rain, and abuse, so America could have its symbol of freedom. But schools, they act like the building appeared out of nowhere, as if it wasn't black bodies that built the seat of American power. Still think the omission was accidental? How many monuments, courthouses, and state buildings were raised by enslaved people, then credited to white architects? How different would patriotism look if Americans had to acknowledge black hands built their democracy? And shouldn't every tour of the White House include the names of those who built it, not just those who lived in it? Comment built but not free. Follow and share, because they didn't just erase the builders, they stole the foundation too.
Enslaved African Americans are often left in the shadows of American history, but many of our ancestors helped to literally build historic landmarks here in D.C., including the White House. Now, the White House Historical Association is exploring the history of those enslaved people with an online exhibit called Slavery in the President's Neighborhood.
I wake up every morning in a house that was built by slaves.
Former First Lady Michelle Obama reminded America of the slave labor that went into building the White House during a speech at the Democratic National Convention 4 years ago.
And I watched my daughters, Two beautiful, intelligent black young women playing with their dogs on the White House lawn.
In its online exhibit, the White House Historical Association linked more than 300 enslaved men, women, and children to building and staffing the White House through the early 19th century. Historians found enslaved people were involved in every aspect of construction. They cleared the land, cut stone and wood, created bricks, and built the walls and the roof. White House records show where those hundreds of slaves came from, and it was from all over the DMV. This interactive map shows slave owners rented out their slaves to help build the White House from as far north as Cecil County to down south in southern Maryland and Stratford, Virginia. Payroll records show slave owners were paid for each enslaved person. They were marked with an N before their names for Negro. The exhibit also shows an extensive timeline of enslaved and free African Americans in and around the White House, and there's a list of all of their known names. Now, there are still pieces of their stories that were never documented and may be lost forever. But
the White House was built by slaves, so I guess they forgot to mention this in your patriotic school books, that the People's House was literally built by people who didn't count as people. The White House, yeah, the symbol of American freedom, needed cheap labor and surprise. Suddenly enslaved black workers were essential workers before the title existed. They cut the stone, laid the bricks, and the government paid their owners instead. Names like Ben, Daniel, Peter, and Harry show up in documents, but history preferred to erase them so America could keep pretending it was born perfect. Wild how the House of Democracy was built on a foundation of hypocrisy strong enough to last centuries. If you're tired of the fairy tale version of history, drop a comment and hit follow. Let's keep pulling receipts. Next.
So yesterday I did a video and I was talking about the enslaved Africans that was forced to build the White House. And I just wanted to expound on that because I think when I say that or when people hear that, they're like, yeah. No, I want people to truly understand that the enslaved people who built the White House were comprised of enslaved Africans, immigrants, forced labor that built the White House, and also the president's wing and the Capitol, but we'll talk about the Capitol later. But I just want to talk to you guys in reference to why this is important. The enslaved Africans did not get paid. Okay? When we're talking about wage disparities, you talk about Americans being wealthy and white Americans being wealthy is because they use free labor. The equivalent, well, back then, each enslaved owner received about $60 annually for sending their enslaved to Washington, D.C. to build the White House. That's equivalent to this day, added in the wages and what we see up to this day, $100,000. $100,000 is equivalent today. Even the architect who designed the White House, 4 of his slaves helped him build. You think they got paid? Now I know some of you racist people are going to sit down and say, well, they had food, they had water, we had to take care of this, they never got a living wage. You know who got the money? Their owners. And those owners had children, and those children profited. So I need you guys to truly understand that when I say I don't give a damn about that White House being torn off, it's because it's the destruction, and our people, our ancestors built that White House. Yes, and they built it with forced labor. They didn't have a choice, and they had to do it. And their owners got paid off of it. Any more questions?
They love to brag about America's founders, but they never brag about the black hands that built the president's palace brick by brick. Repost if you think the truth matters as much as the myth. Here's the part they leave out of every textbook. The White House wasn't built by geniuses in powdered wigs. It was built by enslaved black craftsmen who never got paid, never got credit, and never got the chance to walk through the front door of the home they created. Stonecutters, carpenters, brickmakers, laborers, all forced to create a symbol of freedom for a country that refused to free them. The government rented enslaved workers from their enslavers, tracked their work like inventory, and called it progress. The building you see on every dollar bill? That's stolen labor turned into national pride. So here's the real question. How can a nation preach liberty when the very house its leaders live in was built by people who weren't allowed to be free? Repost if you agree. The foundation of America is black labor, not white legends.
So I woke up and the first thing I see is TikTok lit today. So we exposing the natives, we exposing the YTs. This what we doing today? Cause I'm all for it. Welcome to the cookout. Everybody got so much to say. We ain't the natives, huh? No, we are the natives. Excuse me, we ain't the natives. We the originals. Not only to America, but to the whole entire earth. It's ours. So what happened? I'll tell you what happened. They burned down all of our paper, birth certificates, pictures, documents. They burned down our buildings. I'm talking about houses. I'm talking about sacred places. I'm talking about libraries, okay? They bulldozed all of our mounds. Not only did they bulldoze the mound, they went inside, dug everything up, stole it, and left it there as a viewing site for foreigners and immigrants to go look at. They hired fake chiefs. They paid YT people $5 to take our lands. They erased our identity, reclassified us, relocated us, and told us we were from Africa. Well, I tell you what, since you like giving the credit of the pyramid builder culture, the mound builder culture, the agriculture that's flourished the Americas, and not only Americas, but spread through the entire world, since you want to take credit for it, or you want to give that credit to people who don't deserve it, do it again. Build some more pyramids. Build some more free energy centers. Build some more subway systems. Build some more street cars and street buses. Build it. Do it. Since y'all are the original Americans who were here before us, repeat the history. Replicate the culture. Oh yeah, you can't.
But this is Simply Simone Think coming to you live from the Shy. This is my several-part series on what if black people decided to fade into black and disappear? What would society do? Well, let's start with the White House. Did you know that enslaved black people helped build one of the most iconic buildings in America? The White House. Yeah, we're DEI hires, right? Yeah. Well, did you know when construction began in the 1790s, the U.S. government initially planned to hire European workers. You know, those black jobs that we're stealing, they actually went to them first. And of course they was like, nah, we ain't interested in that. Wasn't nobody lining up to do it. So guess what they did? You got it. When that didn't work out, they turned to enslaved black people. And some free ones also. And basically what we did is, of course, we cut the stone, we sawed the timber, and we even laid the foundation of what would become the home of the U.S. president. Yeah. So that's what DEI hires did. You know, those black jobs. We actually contributed to that. Basically, their names, of course, were left out of the history books. But records show people like Ben, Daniel, and Peter were real individuals whose labor built this nation. And it was a host of other people that aren't even mentioned. Because, you know, we weren't included as people. We were, you know, 3/5 of a human. Yeah, many people today don't even know this part of history. But I'm giving you the 411. So, basically, if you want to erase us, remember, black hands built the White House. Enslaved people did all the work. So that y'all will be comfortable and claim that, you know, only this color men who are rich deserve to be up in there, right? So, I got news for you. If black people gotta be erased from history, that means we're taking the White House with us. No builders, no building, no White House. It's simple math, y'all. Simple like 1, 2, 3. So, why don't you do this? I need you all to tag a friend who needs to hear this. And let's make sure the truth never gets erased.
Hey family, you know, thinking about the history of the White House, you know, the White House was built with mainly slave labor. Of course, there were also white indentured servants and some free black people who helped build the White House building. They started in 1792. However, the large majority, because you got to remember Virginia and Maryland and parts of DC as well had slaves. And so what happened was the slave owners actually were paid the wages. The slaves, of course, didn't get a dime, but they were working out there, breaking up the quarry to make the stone that's in the White House and making bricks and things such as that. And so this was slave labor, and that's what built the White House. And so as I was thinking about that and how slaves built that White House, it's appropriate to tear it down. You know, at first I was just hurt, devastated, and angry that this president was doing that. And it's for various reasons. One is because, you know, I had the pleasure of working there during the Clinton administration, but also it's just I have respect for the office of the president. However, as I was thinking about the root of it and what I feel is happening in this world and today, I feel like God, the universe, is showing us really truth in every area, from deconstructing religion to people's true identities and who they truly are, right? Like the mask has been snatched off, the veil is lifted, right? And so since God is tearing down to rebuild, because eventually all this that's happening now, things are going to get better. Part of that tearing down has to be what's going on in that White House. We have an idiot as a president. We know that. And we know he doesn't regard the Constitution. He doesn't regard any of the foundational things that America was built on. However, America, what was it built on? The backs of slaves. So, tear it down and build your ballroom. Make the Oval Office look like a gaudy museum with gold and all this other foolishness. Because at the end of the day, all that stuff is a representation. What he's tearing down in the natural is a representation of what God is doing in the spirit. Tearing down this mess. So let him do it. Because see, what he's thinking he's doing is building a castle for himself. But little does he know, he might just be building his own grave. You never know. Just a thought.
This is not new. Their tactics are a little bit more bold and open. I mean, when I looked the other day and saw how they're trying to sell off civil rights museums where our ancestors had the courage to be a part of the Freedom Riders, but yet you want to sell that piece of history? As I look at all of what's taking place to our black veterans there at the cemeteries and how they have erased their names, so now you don't know who was the first black and who made some contribution. Don't you know that our blood built this country? Don't you know that our sacrifice made America what it is? Don't you know that America cannot talk about the land of the free and the home of the brave without adding black people to that story? And that's why it disturbs me for somebody who ain't even from America to try to erase what has been done in America. Take yourself back to South Africa. You don't deserve to be in America.
Imagine a time when the Statue of Liberty, our beacon of freedom, stood on a base built by black hands. In the 1880s, enslaved and free black workers dug deep into Bedloe's Island, hauling granite and laying bricks under scorching sun and bitter winds. They forged her pedestal, block by block, while overseers pocketed the pay. From muddy trenches to towering stone, they raised her up, their sweat mixing with the dirt of a promise they couldn't claim. Some were quarrymen, others bricklayers, all denied the liberty she'd symbolize. Their labor gave her a foundation, yet history locked their names away. This isn't just about a statue, it's slavery, irony, and the hands that built America. Imagine freedom without their toil, so why don't we know them? Their story's buried, but it still lifts her high. Comment Black Liberty if they deserve their shine. Follow for more hidden black history. This is just the start. Share this to raise their voices louder, because we're reclaiming their place in the story, one brick at a time. Check out our previous video where we cover the black hands who built the White House.
Every president has lived in a house built by enslaved black hands, and they didn't get paid a dime. Construction on the White House began in 1792. The workforce? Enslaved black people. They quarried the stone. They laid the foundation. They carved the columns. They built the walls that symbolize American freedom, while being treated as property. Records show enslaved laborers were rented from their owners for $5 a month, paid to the slaveholder, not the worker. Some were skilled craftsmen, carpenters, stonemasons, iron workers. Their expertise built one of the most iconic buildings in the world. And when it was finished, they went back to bondage. The White House wasn't the only one. Enslaved people built the U.S. Capitol, the Smithsonian, and countless other government buildings. In 2016, Michelle Obama gave a speech acknowledging this truth. I wake up every morning in a house that was built by slaves. Some people got angry, not at slavery, but at her for saying it out loud. That's America. We'll tour the monuments. We'll praise the architecture. But we won't say who built it or how. Comment built by us if they should teach this in every history class. Like, share, and follow. Because enslaved black people built the foundation of this country. Literally.
The White House and the United States Capitol were built by slaves. Unable to find as many workers as they needed from Europe, the government turned to slavery. Historical records show that hundreds of enslaved people built the Capitol and the White House, and their wages were paid directly to their slave owners. Life of the enslaved laborers who built the Capitol remains largely unknown, but most of them lived in shacks on the building site and received basic medical care and 2 meals per day. They were also responsible for acquiring building materials such as stone, lumber, bricks, hardware, and nails. This legacy of enslaved labor and construction extends beyond the Capitol and White House. Many American cities from Atlanta to New York City still use buildings, roads, ports, and rail lines built by enslaved people. These men, women, and children played a crucial role in building the American economy, but have been largely unrecognized and uncompensated for their contributions. The use of enslaved labor is a stark reminder of the deep-rooted history of slavery and its lasting impact on American economy and society.
An Irish immigrant by the name of James Hoban. He was the architect that designed the original White House. Okay? Originally, the plan was to get these skilled artisans from Europe to come over here and carry out the work. But those people were like, why would I go to America? Why would I go to a place that was a swamp? Now, we'll pass. So, yeah, guess who actually ended up doing the majority of the work in building the White House? Yes, exactly. African American people, both enslaved and free. Believe it or not, I believe that the majority of workers on the building of the White House were black people. were people of African descent. Okay, they quarried the stone, which was from a quarry about 40 miles away from where D.C. came to be in Virginia. They quarried this stone, which means they cut the rock from the actual earth and made it precise, made it to precise measurements, and sent it to the White House to be to help build it. They actually, by the way, the White House is made, the essential elements of the White House are stone, brick, and wood. Those are the building materials: stone, brick, and wood. African Americans participated in crafting those raw materials every step of the way. So they quarried this sandstone from this quarry in Virginia. They transported it to where the White House eventually was built up, and they cut it to measurements, to specifications, to make it fit. Okay. Not only the stone, but those bricks. Those bricks were made. Those bricks were made by enslaved artisans. Okay. They were made primarily by black women and black children. Okay? They made those bricks by hand. And if we were to take off the facade of the White House, you would still see the fingerprints of the enslaved people that made those bricks. Primarily black women and black children made those bricks. Okay? And the brick masons, the people who laid those bricks, they were primarily African American enslaved people. So those brick masons primarily were black, but not only that, some other people were involved too. It wasn't just exclusively built by black people. It was also built by a number of immigrants and also some local white people. But think about it. The usual suspects are the ones that actually built the White House. African Americans, immigrants, and basically poor white people. All right? So, yes, the White House has a history that basically black people's fingerprints are all over that building. So it was designed by an Irish immigrant, Mr. Hoban. He hired some of his own craftsmen, his own carpenters. We know this by the records. And they were his enslaved people. And he got paid for designing the White House, for working on the White House himself, and for the work of the people that he enslaved. They also were paid, but their salaries went to him. It's like that old comedy routine, one for you, 1, 2 for me. 2 for you, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 for me. Instead of, you could take the me part out of it, because all the money that those people labored under went to him. Okay? So that's how they did it back in those days. And they have records to show that these people actually worked on building this institution. Okay? So the White House was built, I think, between 1793 and opened in 1800. John Adams was the first president that moved into the White House when it was finally constructed. Okay? Well, after him, there happened to have been a war of 1812. That's when the British came over here and kicked ass. Okay? I often hear about the fact that, history doesn't always tell us the fact that the British burned down the White House. But they did. And what's really hidden in the history is that many of the soldiers, or many of the troops from Britain that burnt down the White House, they were Colonial Marines. The Colonial Marines was a regiment of black, formerly enslaved American people, Black Americans who linked up with the British. They promised them freedom and land and training and how to be a soldier if they would leave their chains and join the British to help fight the Americans. And that's what they did. The Colonial Marines, I'm not going to get too involved in it because I want you to watch the video that I've already posted on the Colonial Marines, because they were some ass-kicking, whatever. You get it, right? I mean, they overran the United States forces and had a clean path to Washington, D.C., and they laid waste to Washington, D.C., okay? So the Colonial Marines burned down the White House in 1814. This is a fact, okay? They, along with some other British troops, but primarily the Colonial Marines, set fire to the White House. And that was during the time of James Madison and Dolly Madison's occupancy of this place when James Madison was the president, all right? So those Marines burnt down that White House. They were black. They moved on and did a lot of other stuff. Go back and watch my video, okay? So after the White House was burned and after the war ended, the White House was rebuilt. Well, guess who rebuilt it? That's right. Enslaved people rebuilt the White House. So we built it, we burnt it down, and we rebuilt it if you are a person of African descent with American citizenship. These are just facts. So when somebody like a Deion Sanders would say, this is my house, African Americans can proudly say, this is my house when it comes to the White House. You can say my ancestors' fingerprints are all over this place because they are, all right? And mind you, when the White House was being approached by the British military, yeah, Dolly Madison and some of the other people who were in power during that time frame, they saved a lot of the valuables that are cherished by Americans, right? The Constitution, the original Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and the a portrait of George Washington before the fires were set in, right? And before the British actually invaded D.C. Well, guess who took the daggone portrait of Washington off the wall? That's right, enslaved people. In fact, one of the people that everyone in this country should know about, who is Mr. Paul Jennings. Paul Jennings is should be an American icon, because Paul Jennings was one of the ones that was entrusted with getting that picture off of the walls before the British came and ferried it off to safety, right? But Paul Jennings was also an abolitionist. He was a slave to the Madisons at the time, but later, after he earned his freedom, he became one of the greatest abolitionists that nobody has ever heard of. But you'll find out about him if you keep following me. So anyway, once you hear about people trying to cause destruction to that place, at least you know the backstory, okay? So enjoy your weekend. Dirty South out.
President Trump, this message is for you. We see that you are tearing down part of the West Wing of the White House. Although it's called the White House, but you know black people built the White House, right? The slaves. The slaves built the White House for free. But you tearing down a part of the West Wing to extend the ballroom or build a new ballroom. Well, who gonna be there besides your billionaire friends? Now, my ancestors built this country, and it's shameful the work that they did for free
to build this country and the White House, you're tearing it down. Do better, do better.
The story that has brought me to the stage tonight, the story of generations of people who felt the lash of bondage, the shame of servitude, the sting of segregation, but who kept on striving and hoping and doing what needed to be done so that today I wake up every morning in a house that was built by slaves. And I watch my daughters, two beautiful, intelligent black young women, playing with their dogs on the White House lawn.
More than 300 enslaved men, women, and children building and staffing the White House through the early 19th century. Historians found enslaved people were involved in every aspect of construction. They cleared the land, cut stone and wood, created bricks, and built the walls and the roof. Payroll records show slave owners were paid for each enslaved person. They were marked with an N before their names for...
Like much of America, the White House was built on top of native land. But did you know they literally found Native American artifacts on the lawn, indicating that right here was once the site of a Native American village? But sadly, they don't acknowledge this anywhere on the public grounds.
So in 1975, President Gerald Ford wanted a swimming pool built on the south lawn of the White House. As the pool was being dug, a National Park Service curator found a native arrowhead in the excavated soil.
However, they did not convert this area to a proper archaeological site as not to delay the process of building the pool too long. Instead, they picked up truckloads of dirt and brought it to another facility to search through.
The artifacts that were found included stone tools and pottery, indicating this was the exact location of a native village before the arrival of the colonists. And interestingly, although we know that the people who lived here when the colonists arrived were the Anacostans, the artifacts that were found were probably from a woodland people who lived here about 1,000 years previously and were the ancestors of the Anacostans. So a year after the pool was completed, the National Park Service curator led a team of students to do additional archaeological digs on the south lawn of the White House, and they found additional artifacts. However, it's not likely that much digging has occurred since, and it means that there might be native artifacts all around us.
And although there was a nice effort to acknowledge the work of enslaved Africans who helped build the White House with this 2021 panel, there's absolutely no public acknowledgement of the millennia of history related to the indigenous people in this area. But did you know about the artifacts underneath the White House, and what do you think should be done with them? Let us know in the comments and follow for more.
I was invited here to the White House for a Juneteenth celebration, and while we're here and on this topic, let's talk about how enslaved black people built this whole place. In all, over 200 enslaved individuals helped build the White House. Enslaved labor was a part of every stage of construction. Extracted the stone that make up the walls of the White House from quarries in Virginia. Enslaved people also cut down the trees and cleared the land for construction, land that was once home to the Anacostan indigenous peoples. Even did the housekeeping labor once the building was finally constructed. And enslaved black people also helped build other DC monuments like the Capitol building and the Washington Monument likely as well. But did you already know this? Let me know in the comments and follow for more.
Did you know enslaved African Americans built the White House? It's true. In 1792, African Americans started the construction. Imagine being forced to build a symbol of freedom without any freedom. However, their contributions weren't acknowledged for many years. Let's honor their strength and resilience.
On today's episode of places that should have been burnt to the damn ground that were built by enslaved people, we have the White House. The White House and other government agencies in the early days were built by us, enslaved people, black enslaved people. Initially, DC wanted to commission European workers, but because Europeans said no, the enslaved African Americans built the White House, specifically my ancestors, because when they stole my people, they came to Virginia. So the DMV enslaved peoples built the White House. They were fed 2 meals a day and they normally slept in the attic. So even though it's not a plantation per se, but yeah, it would just be awesome if that shit did not exist anymore. Ancestors, do y'all think?
Not only did enslaved laborers help build the White House, all of the earliest presidents, except for John Adams and his son John Quincy Adams, owned enslaved people. George Washington, the first president of the United States, was not left out. In fact, he was a notorious slave owner, which he used to increase his wealth through the Mount Vernon plantation.
But one thing that's for certain,
the house that thing in the White House is in was built by slaves and was designed by slaves. So yes, black people built the White House, black people built the Capitol. Hell, black people built this country. And y'all got in y'all feelings and had such a hissy fit when Michelle Obama said she wakes up every day in a house that was built by slaves, which that is true. We built it all. And what about now? Y'all don't build nothing now, but every time we did build something, y'all destroy the shit. So what's the difference? And I love y'all when y'all make y'all racist memes. Y'all racist memes, they're comical, just like y'all. As I said before, MAGA is just a bunch of maniacs. But anyway, though, I love your racist meme. Keep it up.
Imagine a time when the White House, America's symbol of power, was built on the backs of enslaved black men, names like Peter and Ben, whose stories were buried for centuries. In 1792, construction began in Washington, D.C., and these men were forced to quarry heavy stone, cut timber in sweltering heat, and lay the foundation under brutal conditions. They worked from dawn to dusk, their hands blistered, their families torn apart, while their enslavers pocketed the government's pay. From 1792 to 1800, they toiled alongside free laborers, their sweat mixing with the dirt of a new capital, shaping an icon we all know today. Some were skilled carpenters, others hauled loads heavier than their own dreams, yet their names were erased from history. This isn't just about a building, it's about slavery, race, and the hidden labor that built a nation. Imagine the White House without their hands. So why don't we know their stories? Their legacy's been buried, but it still stands tall. Comment White House if these men deserve their spotlight. Follow for more hidden black history. This is just the beginning.
Don't tell me you reject DEI when you live in a White House built by black hands. Let me shout it this morning from the White House. The White House is a DEI house built by slaves who work without the benefit of compensation.
Did you know black slaves built part of the White House? In 1791, Pierre L'Enfant, the planner of Washington City, leased African-American slaves to clear the sites for the President's House, now known as the White House and the Capitol. Struggling to find enough hands, Washington's Board of Commissioners turned to enslaved African Americans. Their roles ranged from hauling materials to performing skilled labor such as carpentry and stone cutting. The National Archives hold wage rolls, listing African American workers like Tom, Peter, Ben, and Harry, who were instrumental in shaping these iconic structures. The wages, however, were paid directly to the slave owners. One such record is a promissory note for Negro Dick at the Capitol, paid $5 per month for 3 months. Like many others, he lived in a shack on the building site, his life largely unrecorded, yet his work standing tall in the heart of the Capitol. This is a tribute to those unnamed heroes who, with their toil and sweat, helped build symbols of a nation's power and prestige.
Watching Donald Trump literally tear down the White House is very symbolic. A White House that was originally built by black slaves, might I add. For years, the propaganda has been pushed that black people were going to destroy America, that black people were uncivilized, that our culture was literally steeped in destruction. And now we are sitting in real time in 4K watching a white man completely destroy America. But one thing it does do is allows for the propaganda to now be unveiled as the lie that it has always been. But just like the original White House was built by black folks, when they destroy this country as you know it, black folks will be the ones to rebuild and lead the next one.
The construction of the White House, one of the most iconic symbols of American democracy, was built in large part by enslaved laborers, a fact often overshadowed in history books. When President George Washington selected the site for the White House in 1791, Washington, D.C. was still a developing city with little infrastructure. In order to build the home of the president, cheap and skilled labor was required, and much of this labor came from enslaved black workers who toiled under harsh conditions with no recognition. At the time, the U.S. government struggled to find enough skilled white laborers willing to work on the project, so they turned to slavery. Many of the enslaved workers were rented out by their owners to the federal government, which paid the slave owners, not the workers themselves. Enslaved laborers performed backbreaking work, including cutting stones, laying bricks, sawing wood, and making mortar. Skilled enslaved craftsmen, such as carpenters, masons, and blacksmiths, also played a crucial role, constructing the framework and intricate architectural details of the building. Documents from the time show the names of some of these enslaved workers, including Ben, Daniel, Peter, and Harry, who were all recorded as laborers on the White House. However, because enslaved people were treated as property, most of their full names were never recorded, and their contributions were largely erased from historical narratives for centuries. The irony of the People's House being built by people who had no rights, freedom, or voice in government is stark. Even after the White House was completed in 1800, slavery continued within its walls as several early presidents, including Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, and Andrew Jackson, enslaved people in the White House itself. It wasn't until 2016, during Michelle Obama's speech at the Democratic National Convention, that mainstream awareness of this history gained significant traction. In her speech, she reminded the nation that she, a black woman, woke up every morning in a house built by slaves, a powerful statement that forced many Americans to confront this painful history.
Hello family, thank you for making it to this very end, where we do a critical analysis and review of the clips we just watched, putting everything into perspective and adding depth and weight into the conversation. Let's begin with the historical contradiction of the United States White House. You see, this very institution purports to represent democracy, freedom, and leadership. Yet, ironically, it was constructed through forced labor. This contradiction is not symbolic, it's literal and physical. So the very foundations of American governance rest on enslaved labor. And what's shocking, that people would argue that the labor was unskilled. This is not true, because the labor was real, skilled, and essential. So this corrects the myth that enslaved people were unskilled. They cut and transported sandstone, cleared the land and drained swamps, crafted bricks and laid foundations, worked as carpenters, masons, and blacksmiths. You see, these were dangerous jobs which really required skills, not manual assistance. And even before this very assignment, many enslaved workers had expertise passed down through generations. And what's even more shocking was the role the government played in the whole saga. And this is often missing in public discourse. The government leased enslaved laborers and paid slave owners directly. These transactions were recorded meticulously. This meant slavery was not just tolerated, it was administratively managed. This wasn't a private moral failure, it was a public policy choice. Even beyond the White House, brothers and sisters, there were a couple of other institutions, facilities, and installations where the black Americans enslaved were forced into building. These include the US Capitol, some roads, bridges, and canals, and early Washington, D.C. infrastructure. So slavery was essentially embedded into city planning. It was not accidental. The Capitol itself is a product of enslaved labor. So slavery wasn't on the margins of American development, brothers and sisters. It was very central to it. And what is shocking is the human cost. Workers endured physical punishment, unsafe working conditions, long hours with no protection. And what happened in between is that families were separated, many died without recognition or burial markers. Yet, the house was permanent, that is the White House, but their suffering was treated as disposable. So there's a moral contradiction this about freedom and bondage. You see, early presidents who lived in the White House actually owned enslaved people. Freedom was articulated in speeches while denied in practice. What an irony. This building symbolizes liberty internationally while masking an element of exploitation. So American freedom was actually also noteworthy is the aspect of erasure and selective memory. This explains why today people are shocked to hear some of these things. It's not because they didn't want to know, but it's because the schools often, they sanitize these early American histories so that you really don't get to understand what exactly happened, mostly the dark history. So enslaved labor is mentioned only briefly, and the focus is on founders and not the builders. Even in the American Constitution, you would hear them talk about the founding fathers and all that, but rarely does it even talk about the very builders. So this omission shapes national identity. What a nation chooses not to teach is just as revealing as what it celebrates. Even after the liberations and all that, during the emancipation, nothing was done to repair, you see, restitution, nothing of that sort. These enslaved builders went without wages, no land, no formal apology, yet the wealth they generated went to the state and white families. So that leads to generational disadvantage that followed. So freedom without repair leaves inequality intact. And now we haven't heard about reparations and all that. That's why Black Americans are actually calling for that. It's not about charity, it's about unpaid labor, state sanctions exploitation, wealth extraction. These economic records do exist in the United States. If labor was taken, restitution is not radical, it's only rational. Even beyond that dark history, there are modern day symbolisms that we can relate to today. You see, the current president, Donald Trump, has engaged in renovations, additions, and removals, which feel symbolic because the building carries unresolved history. Without acknowledging this, any changes feel like erasure. Memory must be protected beyond modern modernization. You see, you cannot remodel a wound when it was never treated in the first place. This matters even today because the history explains the wealth gaps we see today, distrust in institutions, cultural erasure. It only reframes Black American history as a foundational, not peripheral. This isn't about the past alone, it's about understanding the present honestly. So as I come to the close of this, my folks, the White House stands because enslaved Black Americans made it stand. That very truth does not weaken America. It only challenges America to be mature. So a nation strong enough to face its foundations is strong enough to move forward. And that's my take on this subject matter, brothers and sisters. You can weigh in the discussion in the comment section below. I'll see you guys in my next video.